So I thought I'd just tell you a bit about this because it's something that we started about 7 years ago now with Alison Glover. So some of you remember Alison Glover, who was one of the BTS research nurses. She did a bit of time with us on Trigger, which was a study looking at transfusion thresholds and PI bleeding. And the other side of what she was doing was the code-red audit. And she's obviously left a couple of years ago. We've carried this on, and but to be honest with you, just to tell you about this because it's something also that we've been doing for a while, but it's something that you've not really had much involvement in, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on like this that Mer's field does that it doesn't really involve recruiting actively patients on the floor, for example. There's some data studies we do, some biomarker stuff, things like that. So it's just to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the other stuff that goes on. This is obviously in the data category, so a purely data collection study. So lots of people involved. There's something called the Scottish Transfusion Lab Supported Trauma Group. So this was set up back in 2013 by myself and someone called Sam Rawlinson, who was a transfusionist in Dundee. He was a wonderful character. He was a military guy, and he helped set this up. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. So most of the work that we've done was dedicated to our publications and things to set up this group. But the whole idea was to try and bring together blood transfusion, people with an interest in blood transfusion, so haematologists, transfusionists, emergency department physicians, and also pre-hospital, because we obviously give blood pre-hospital, something we can't just touch on. But to try and bring everyone together to try and improve how we give blood on the ED. And the group's done an awful lot over the last 7 years. So, for example, before we started, we didn't have a code red protocol. We didn't have any pre-hospital blood. So now we've got Medic 1 takes blood, which sits in a fridge and goes out to Medic 1. We didn't have a code red protocol, so if an ambulance service is meeting someone who's hypertensive and is bleeding, they can phone up. And now what we can also do is have blood ready, not only red cells, which sit in our fridge, but also FFP platelets ready when they arrive. And that's all come through this group. Warming blood, so now we warm blood, put it through a warmer, and mainly ourselves in Glasgow have done different bits of that, and we've sort of copied each other's things. So they did a lot of blood warming, so we took their protocol, we did that. And certainly Dundee, Edinburgh, and Glasgow are all doing that. And this is the first time to have an evening board now as well. So we've been auditing every couple of years, and for this time we've actually got Aberdeen to put all their patients into it as well. So it's a proper national audit. So yeah, people from all over the place. So when we have patients coming down with trauma, we have 3 categories of them. And those of you who've been down in ED, we haven't got any trauma studies going on at the moment, but there's 3 categories. You've got an ED trauma, which is the green one on the bottom of the chart. You've got the advanced trauma, and then you've got the code reds. So code reds are quite rare. These are the patients who we know are bleeding. So they're major trauma. We know they're bleeding. They've got a blood pressure that's less than 90, so pretty low, pre-hospital. And if you give them a bit of fluid, it make no difference whatsoever. So these patients, that when they come to the ED, we know we need to give them blood fairly quickly. Lots of them end up in theatre. So these are really sick patients. You'll see how many we get, but it's generally only about 10 or 15 a year. So we only see these once, twice a month. The idea of this was to look at how we manage these patients across the whole of Scotland. And that's the teams that are involved. So you've got the Tayside Trauma Team, ERMS in the West, Medic 1, obviously the North come on board as well. Now there's ERMS East, that's the helicopter service, on in Glasgow, and now they've set up Aberdeen. And there may well be one starting next year, the South East Air Ambulance Service, in the same way as ERMS, the same way. So this is looking at those patients to see how we can better care for them by looking at what happens to them. So we had lots of things we wanted to look at, and it's very similar to what we looked at previously. We've done this 3 times. We did it in 2013 to 14, 15, 16, 17, and this is 2018 and 19. So in each site, we had someone who was collecting clinical data, And here it was Andrea Wolf. So she was one of our ECTS trainees who came through for a week. And also an excellent medical student called Hamish, who did it as part of an SSC student. I think he was up for a few weeks last year up in the office. And there's also a transfusion lead in each site. So we had someone called Catherine Innes, which some of you may have met. She was our transfusion practitioner. So she collected all the blood data. And each site across Scotland, one of both clinician clinical data and a transfusion person. We used RedCap, got the money from SBTS to do that, and it was a service evaluation because we are looking at service class. It's a service evaluation project in terms of research, audit, service evaluation, what approvals we needed. So this is the data. So it is only 2000 to 2019. The reason for that is this is a really difficult process to try and get all this together. You would have thought, well, we know all this, and surely this data is collected, but STAG only collects minimal data from blood. It just collects when TXA has been given, but nothing else. In England, they got equipment called TARN, which is Trauma Audit Research Network. So they do lots of the English major trauma centre research. They don't collect any blood data. So when we first published this, we're pretty much the only place in the world, apart from Scandinavia, that collects some of this data. And now we've done it for 3 years, we can look at our practice sort of changing over time. So over 2 years, we had 96 activations across the whole of Scotland. Many more in Glasgow, so 45 here, 44 in the west, 3 in Dundee and Aberdeen. So a real difference between the number of these patients. So you can see most of the major trauma is based in the sort of central belt. Part of that's due to if you crash your car on Skye, you get helicoptered back to Glasgow, so going to Glasgow. Dundee doesn't see an awful lot at all. You can see just 4 cases in 2 years. And North Aberdeen only saw 4 cases in 2 years, mainly with serious major trauma. And that's got real problems because that was one of the things when we set up the trauma centres in Scotland, was whether there should be 2, 1. We only see enough major trauma in Scotland for really 1 trauma centre. Whereas you look at the northeast of England, for example, they've got Middlesbrough, and they've got another, I think, Carlisle, I think perhaps as well, are trauma centres because they've got their population means that they see far more trauma just in that sort of area than we do in the whole of Scotland. So if you're going to get good at managing this, you need to see more patients before a year. So that's why there was a lot of politics about whether there should be trauma centres in Aberdeen or not, because of just not seeing enough patients to keep skills up. But equally, geographically, Scotland is very difficult to bring everybody down from Inverness all the way down to Edinburgh, Glasgow. So there's other things apart from how many patients we see. So a bit more demographic is typical sort of trauma data. So mean age 43, 70% male. ISS score is severity of the injury. So anything over 50 counts as a major trauma. So a score of 29 is quite high. And you can see for each region, ours was slightly lower, which is probably because we're activating COVID maybe with a slightly lower threshold than Glasgow, perhaps. The Aberdeen is 50. That's a massive trauma, and you'll see none of those patients do very well. So when they see these patients, they're going to be very sick. So whether they're just not activating it enough, or whether they're only putting in, they did put all their code reds, but maybe they're not activating code enough. Maybe we're activating it a bit more than maybe we don't need it, and it's mainly blunt trauma scaling you'd expect. Okay, 68% survive, so there's a reasonable mortality in the group which you'd expect. And of those that died, a third of them died in the ED itself, out of the ED, and the rest died within the hospital. So a lot of data. I'm just going to point a few things out. So we've talked about that ISS, blunt score, blunt trauma. A bit about pre-hospital characteristics. So when we first looked at this, we weren't really doing much pre-hospital transfusion. Whereas in 2018, 2019, over 3/4 of the patients who were code red actually got blood pre-hospital. And I know from something I did a few months ago that now we're not sure whether giving pre-hospital red cells is a good thing or not. Just packed red cells with the refill trial. We're not sure now whether we should be giving whole blood or FFP. But now we're doing it. We're giving it to more glucose patients. And those, most of the 9 in 10 who got pre-hospital transfusion then went to get pre-hospital blood in hospital, which means we're giving blood pre-hospital to the right patients because they're then going on to get more blood. One of the things that we looked at really early was how long it takes for us to activate the code red, because what we found initially was that you'd be on the scene, you manage the patients, you package them all up, you'd be driving into hospital, you'd phone up nurse in charge, put the call out and say, oh, we'll activate a code red, and you're like 20 minutes from the hospital. So the lab just like run around, you know, for nothing, absolutely mad panic was trying to get all the red cells down, and we need to give them more heads up. So what we did was we changed it so that when the clinician, the team get to the scene, they recognise the code red, they phone up there. So you have much more time for the effectively red cells. So we've now got 80 minutes from before to the time of the code red, and you'll see a bit later on the number of time that actually before we activated around about 20 minutes. We're getting slightly better at activating it earlier. Still not 100% at TXA, only 83% of people get TXA, but clearly all of you patients having it. So this is the bit was better. So this is one to try and get as high as possible the time from the activation to getting to ED. So it's about 20 minutes. It was about 10 when we started. We went to about 30 minutes. Got back a bit. So we probably forgetting to put that call in when we get to the scene. We're now thrown back there, going to hospital. So that's something we need to remind people to do. A few more things here, just to pick out from this. So the time of arrival in the ED to getting some red cells is now 4 minutes. So can't we beat that? In South East Scotland, it's nothing. So the red cells are there at the moment. That's massively improved over time. The same with FFP. That's now 16 minutes. So that will be almost an hour sometimes. Actually, come in and need some FFP. 55 minutes will go past before we actually got FFP down. Now we've got it down to 16 minutes, so it's pretty much there in the patient eyes. You see in the Royal, it's 5 minutes. Doing better than everyone. Getting blood, so you'll know that some of you done a bit of work on the Rotem. So we've got a machine that will look at coagulation as the patient comes in. It gives us a mark of whether they need platelets or FFP immediately, and that tells us how the patient's clotting is at that time. We still send the full blood count as clotting. The reason we use Rotem is it still takes 70 minutes to get a full blood count result back from the time the patient came in. 48 minutes from when it's sent, and still clotting speeds over an hour from the patient's. So we can't react to that, and that's why it's so important we have Rotem, which tells us immediately within 10 minutes of getting a sample of the patient. That's slightly better, but still not useful enough to be able to treat patients. Wastage. So the problem with getting stuff down to the ED really quickly is a lot of the time they'll get down there and died, and they don't need the 10 red cells that you've got sent down or that. It comes down that the patient's actually well than you thought, and they don't actually need it much. So getting it there early comes with the fact that you also have some wastage. You can see it's not doing too bad. We've wasted about 80 units across the country in terms of red cells and FFP platelets. So I had a quick look to see how that compares to previous years. The few things that are quite interesting. You see the number of activations we've got going up and up. So it's 56, 66, and now 96. It's partly because Aberdeen come on board, but Alison contributed for. It might be that we've got a lower threshold for activating COVID, or it might be just that it's a bit more serious trauma. The percentage of male has gone down a bit. We've got more females involved. The ISS is going up and up, so it's 26, 28, 31. So it's probably not that we're activating it lower, because the severity of the trauma is getting higher. seeing sick patients. Number of transfusions that people got pre-hospital, 16 in the first one. There's now 73 patients got pre-hospital transfusion before they got to hospital. TXA we're getting better at. Another thing as well, which on the back of the refill trial about giving blood and not giving fluids, we're giving less and less fluids. So 266 mils pre-hospital, not very much at all, giving blood early because we've got it. And then there's a bit about, we talked about times getting clotting stream and red cells. Again, that's all improving, but it's still not great, whereas we're using Rotin more. So this was really only Rotin that started being introduced a couple of years ago. So we had 13 clinicians that got Rotin, but it'll be much more. So that's pretty much it. It's just a snapshot of how we manage sort of bleeding trauma and how that sort of changed over the years. And I'm actually going to hand over some of this stuff now to the one of the transfusionists in Glasgow. They've actually appointed someone with an S and BTS to do this work. We're trying to get some of it incorporated into STAG because we feel this is quite important data. And to see if they'll take some of it as part of the Scottish Trauma Network, to see if they're interested in carrying on looking at some of this. But the transfusion team in Glasgow are doing this because they all feel, and I feel as well, it's important that we keep looking at this because we can see the differences that have come on the back of this looking at it. So all started with a massive level back in 2012. That's where we are now. So we made some recommendations for the next what things we need to do better in the next few years. And these were things like new areas of development. So because O negative is such a rarity, such an important resource, we're now starting to think about giving O positive blood if we know it's a male trauma victim. So obviously, if you're female, you don't want to be such positive because then if you get positive cells, you produce antibodies to positive. If you are pregnant with a positive baby, you will then you will across the centre, you will then attack the baby. So that's why you get anti-D. You have, if you're rhesus negative, you have a pregnancy, but there's not enough for these O negative to go around. So we're starting. So that's already been started. So sometimes you might see that O positive being sent down for trauma. That's going to be rolled out across the country. There's things like at the moment, COVID has to be activated by a medical team, whereas now more and more we're starting to get say, paramedics team bringing someone like this. Should they be able to activate, be able to get themselves? Most people think they should be able to activate something that's going to be rolled out in the next few years. It's really difficult to get all this data. So blood transfusion hold lots of it. We hold some of it on track, but it doesn't all seem to link together. That's the same with lots of things in the NHS. It's all there. How does it get it together? So we're trying to find a more streamlined way to try and collect it all. And that obviously will hopefully involve STAG. But that's how STAG do it. They just put it out all the notes like that. And then again, a bit more about trying to get clinicians to activate COVID earlier again. To try and make sure that the labs have got plenty of things up.